I've got a very cool looking watch here from Germany, and the dial and that bezel insert is made of forged carbon. In addition to that, the lume has also been implemented into that carbon in order to give the watch a very unique look in the evening. Now this is going to be a very interesting review because I found 6 things on this watch, 6 gripes that I want to share with you, and maybe 1 or 2 of those gripes could be a deal breaker for some of you guys, but I think it's a unique 70s inspired design. It's quirky, it's retro. This blue one has been such an easy wear. I think Heinrich have done really well. Let's check it out. Now some of you might be thinking, what is forged carbon? Well, it's used in the manufacture of high performance products, in areas such as automotive, aerospace and even sports industries. Now the manufacturing process of forged carbon allows for high strength and complex shapes, and in this finalized form it's also lightweight as well as very pleasing in its aesthetic. Now I've had a few versions of the Taucher on the channel before and I've liked the 70s inspired case and its designs. It's very retro, so this forged carbon version for me seems to have escalated the watch into an entirely different look, and especially this blue one. Now that said, as I mentioned, there are 6 gripes that I want to talk about this watch that I've encountered throughout the week, so I will share those in the gripes section of this video. Now you saw the pop-up, Heinrich has sponsored this video, so I will of course leave a link in the description section. If this or any of their watches interest you, feel free to check them out. Now let me share the basic specs of the watch firstly and then dive into my experience. The case diameter comes in at 41mm with a case height of 13.9. I measure a lug to lug of 47.9 and a lug width of 20. The crown is a 6.9mm signed, loomed and screw down crown. The watch offers 200 meters of water resistance, and the total weight on the supplied bracelet sized to my 18cm wrist, I measure exactly 157 grams. Now turning the watch over, you can see there's a solid case back, nicely designed with its wave pattern, and behind that case back is a Sellita SW200 Elaborate grade. It's adjusted in 4 positions, around 38 hours. There is no ghost position, which is great, and both of these watches, I've had them on the time grapher, whether the blue, whether the orangey brown one, they've been running bang on. Very accurate, very stable, so in that department I have 0 complaints. Now for me, the look on the wrist for this blue model has been very pleasing in my eyes. I've really enjoyed the way that forged carbon dial has offered some specs that you pick up in certain light, and it shows off that manufacturing process. But saying that, at other times in different light, the dial and bezel also give off a dark, deep blue tone, which again is very easy on the eyes. It seems to offer excellent contrast against that handset and markers. Now as for this orangey brown model, personally I did not gel with it very well. So I didn't spend a lot of time on the wrist with it, but I did manage to shoot it in some different light as well as macros, so you can get a gauge of what it looks like up close and personal. Now looking at that bracelet, the integration is very good. I count 15 links across the width of it, and with a very small link size, it seems to have excellent articulation, and with a combination of that on-the-fly micro-adjustable clasp, it's been very comfortable on the wrist, and I think the design of the actual bracelet suits the watch's dynamic. Very retro inspired in its design language. Now turning my attention to that bezel, it's a 120 click unidirectional bezel. It's got a forged carbon insert. It's lume filled. There's also lume on the side. As you can see, there's a couple of waves. That's lume filled as well. And the action, the best way for me to describe the action on this, it's a very easy to operate bezel with a positive ratcheting system. It's got a hint of back play, and on both of the watches they seem to line up just perfectly. Lastly, the lume. That forged carbon dial and bezel insert have lume running through them, as well as the handset and markers. So it's done quite interestingly because the applications are very good on the important parts of the watch, which is the handset and markers. It's very bright and legible, but it also seems to be infused into that carbon quite creatively. So it's a very cool look, and it did take me by surprise looking down at my wrist when I first saw it. Now all that said, what are the gripes or room for improvement of this watch? Well, there's 6 gripes altogether. 4 of them are objective and 2 subjective, and I'll share them all. Firstly, the knurling on that bezel. It's quite nice and good depth, but it's also a little bit tricky to get a grip on. Because the top of the bezel is a little bit smooth, If you had gloves on, you'd find it very tricky to turn this bezel. Now the ratcheting system is easy, it doesn't require a lot of effort, so that's a big plus. But just mentioning for you guys, that was one of the observations I've had throughout the week with this watch. The bezel knurling is not as grippy as I'm used to on a dive style watch. Next gripe I want to talk about is that bracelet. Now I like the design. It's not a hair pincher, it's been great on the wrist, but because there's 15 links across, it's got screw pins, which is great. But if you were to tighten up that screw a little bit too tight, what happens is you tighten up the bracelet, and each of those links, when they tighten, they stop the watch from having good articulation. Now you can't not tighten these screws because they'll eventually work themselves loose and you'll probably lose the watch off your wrist. So the way to get around this is if you use a few dabs of thread lock on those screws and tighten them just enough, the problem will be solved. But that's been an observation I found. I tightened the screws and I found that these links, they just tightened up. They wouldn't articulate at all. As soon as I put thread lock and torqued them down the right amount, then it solved that problem. The third gripe for me is the price. The watch comes in at €10.99, which is not cheap. Now the watches have both been superb. They're super accurate with that elaborate grade Solida. I like the applied logo, I like the forged carbon dials, the way they've got Lume infused, it's been great. But in saying that, €10.99 is €10.99 in anyone's book, so it's not an inexpensive watch. Keep that in mind. And my fourth objective gripe is that these watches are limited to 150 pieces. 75 on the blue, 75 on the orangey brown. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, I'm not a big fan when companies limit the production of watches. It just creates unnecessary urgency to buy the watch. Now in saying all that, I did mention that I've got two subjective gripes, and my first one is that crystal. The crystal is great, but the anti-reflective coating on both watches is blue. Now I don't mind it so much on the blue watch, it seems to blend in and work well, but on the orange-brown version it seems to stand out a little bit more. Now that is subjective, that is my personal gripe, but in saying that, there is anti-reflective coating on the underside of the crystal as well as the top. And some people might not find that to their pleasure because it can lead to more smudges and fingerprints. It also does offer a cleaner look of that dial. And secondly, there is no quick release end links, and I'm mentioning it because I've worn this watch exclusively on the bracelet, although I know a lot of people might want to change it up on different straps. And because of the relatively flat profile of that side, it's probably a good thing there are no quick release end links. They've included drilled lugs instead. I'm mentioning it for you guys because we are pretty much used to having end links that are easier to remove. This one does not feature them. And speaking back about that side profile, even though I measured around 13.9 millimeters total case height to the top of that domed box sapphire crystal, the watch actually wears surprisingly flat on the wrist. So I think it's been a really nice looking watch, a very different one at that. I've enjoyed the blue version very much. Did not bond at all with this. Not trying to be a hater, guys, but everyone's got their personal choice. So hit me up in the comments, let me know what you think about these two new watches from Heinrich. The experience I've had has been very good on the wrist. From an accurate, very good looking watch, very legible, excellent lume, really good comfort on that bracelet. After a few tweaks with some thread lock, I've managed to find a really nice sweet spot from this 70s inspired look and design. So thanks for watching, be well, be safe, continue to enjoy the hobby, and we'll see you in the next one.